All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get going. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Whitfield. I'm a Davis Connects advisor for law, government, and policy. I know a lot of you on the webinar, but some new faces as well, so welcome. I'm hoping that this will be helpful for you, for anyone thinking about law school, even those of you who know the general process. I've got some updates in here in terms of how COVID-19 has changed things, particularly in terms of the LSAT and admissions and things like that. So please do feel free to put anything you have questions on in the chat box, and I'll check that a couple times during the session and make sure that we answer those. So I'm going to turn off my video for the moment just because I have two cats and they like to make appearances in Zoom. But here we go. All right. So, questions to consider when you're thinking about law school. So first, kind of why law school? A lot of people, I think, have the idea that, oh, well, it's a really good degree. And yes, in general, that's true. But as you also may know, it's very time consuming and very expensive in some cases. So you really want to be clear on why you're actually going to law school and if that's something you really want, or you just think it's kind of a good idea in general. So what will you do with that law degree? So along the same lines. So one of the big things that I like to talk to students about when they're considering law school is what you ultimately want to do, and it's okay if you don't have that exactly figured out at the moment, is that something that you actually need a law degree for, or is maybe a master's better, or maybe a bachelor's is good for now with eventually a master's? So there are a lot of different options there, and again, sometimes it just depends on where you're going with that law degree and what you actually want to accomplish. And sometimes you don't need it, other times it's really, really helpful to have. When are you thinking of going? So in the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about this more, but thinking about whether you want to go directly after Colby, or if you want to take a couple of years off. Either way is fine. It has definitely been trending more that people will take a couple of years off, but that everybody's different. So some people, it makes a lot of sense to go directly. So that's really a personal decision, and that's something that I can help you kind of work through. And what's your GPA? So this is a big thing to consider, but not a deal breaker no matter how you feel about your GPA. So what I mean by that is it used to be the case that it was pretty much your GPA and your LSAT score, your law school admissions test score, that really were the make or break for law schools. In the last 5 to 10 years, that's really changed in terms of they are still important, but they're really looking at the full person. So you want to think about, okay, what is your argument and what is your kind of personal statement and passion for why you want to go to law school? And how does that jive with your GPA in terms of if you have a lower one, then let's talk about, okay, how do you do well on the LSAT to offset that a bit? Or how do you make a really awesome impression in your personal statement and other pieces of the application? So before I get into this changing field of law, I just want to do a quick poll. If you want to take just a second and just put what your class year is, that'll just give me a good sense so I can tailor this a little bit for those of you who are either very close to maybe going or those who are not really at all. So just take a second and do that. It's like almost everybody's filled that out. All right, cool. So, all right, so no first years. All right, so mostly seniors and then a few juniors and sophomores. So thank you. That's helpful, and I'll use that throughout the presentation. Okay, so changing field of law. So applications are definitely increasing, and I think we'll see this even more with COVID-19 going into next year's application cycle. Varying majors is a big thing that's changed as well. So if you talk to people who went to law school 10, 15 years ago, you're probably going to find a lot of history, English, government, political science majors, and the like. And that was pretty common for many, many years. Now, law schools are really appreciating the fact that students are majoring in a lot of different things, and they really value the liberal arts education. So that's a big plus for you. So if you're anything from biology to math, to, even if you are in one of the history, government, English, all of those are really relevant. So particularly those of you who may be considering like adding a major, adding a minor, or double majoring or something like that, don't feel like you have to add any of those or you have to major in anything specific, because that's definitely not going to affect your law school chances in terms of getting in. Now, taking time off between undergrad and law school. So as I mentioned, that's changed a bit too. So 5 to 10 years ago, it was pretty much 70-30, in that 70% of people applying were pretty much coming directly out of undergraduate, and 30% were taking a couple years off or more. Now that's almost completely flipped. So about 70% are taking time off in between. So, like I said, that's going to vary for everybody. Some of you who are not seniors, it may make sense for you to apply in the next cycle. Those of you who are seniors, might make sense to take a couple years off or even just 1 year off. Um, it is the case that for a lot of people, it makes sense to take some time off, just because it really cements their decision to go to law school, whether they actually do an internship or a full-time opportunity in the field of law, or even if they don't. And it's also the case that sometimes if you, particularly if you're not that happy with your GPA or LSAT scores, it can really help to have some job experience and more life experience under your belt before you put in that application. So that's something to think about as well. And related, the times between undergrad and law school doesn't matter that much. So, for example, used to be a case that you really needed to be paralegal, legal assistant, something like that. That was pretty much what everybody did if they took time off in between. Now, law school admissions officers are telling us we don't really care what you do. We just want you to be productive and be using your time for something. In other words, don't take off 2 years to study for the LSAT. That doesn't look very good. They want you to do something productive, and ideally something that helps you cement your decision about whether you want to go to law school or not. So happy to talk more about that and other possibilities. But again, you should not feel boxed into having to be a paralegal or a legal assistant. All right. So important skills for law school. So this is where Colby is really helpful in terms of it's giving you kind of automatically the skills that you need for law school. So writing, and I don't necessarily mean English courses, although if you're an English major, great. Writing is a huge, huge piece for law school, and they want to see that you've taken courses that incorporate that. So even for those of you in the sciences, that's still going to be a big piece of your education here at Colby. So you're going to be prepared for that. Analytical thinking and problem solving. So I put a couple of different examples here that can be helpful. Logic is a course that some people, in terms of alumni, have said is really helpful in terms of the LSAT, can be kind of helpful for law school, but again, you don't have to take that. Same thing with like music theory courses and math courses. So those are some to think about if you have an opportunity at this point if you're not a senior. But again, if you are a senior and you didn't take any of those, you're not any worse off than anyone else. Research, this is a big one. So anyone who has an opportunity to be a research assistant or perhaps do a senior thesis or independent study, any of those opportunities are really great for a law school application. The same is true if you take some time off and maybe you go and be a research assistant for a think tank, or you work for a big research organization. All of those things are really helpful when it comes to your law school applications. And so anytime you have an opportunity to take advantage of that is helpful. So even if right now you're a senior and you have a big senior paper in one of your seminar courses or just a semester long paper that you're finishing up in the next few weeks, those opportunities can be really helpful and are things that you can highlight on things such as your resume. And finally, public speaking and debate. This is one that can be helpful, but is definitely not required. If you're someone who is not really fond of public speaking, if you have an opportunity to work on those skills, whether it's just speaking up more in class or speaking in front of a club group or something like that, definitely take advantage there. and we still have a mock trial team. So any of those opportunities, if you feel like you'd like to take advantage of them, go for it. But again, not required. So before we get into the actual schools and that sort of thing, I just want to take a second. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. I'll wait just a second here if anybody has any at the moment, but then please feel free over the next few minutes if you want to put any in there, and I will check back again at the end. Um, okay, so I don't see any at the moment, so feel free to put those in there, and again, I'll check back in a few minutes. All right, so doing your research. This is really important in terms of making sure that you're choosing the right school for you. So the LSAC website, that stands for the Law School Admissions Council. The Law School Admissions Council is the organization who administers the LSAT, the test that you have to take, and also is the portal in which you register and actually apply to law school. So it's a little bit similar to the Common App that you did for Colby in terms of there's one place that you do it. There is a little bit of difference in terms of some schools have slightly different prompts for personal statements. Some have, an extra recommendation they need or that sort of thing, but there is one place. So eventually you will need to make an account if you're going to apply to law school, and you definitely have to if you're going to take the LSAT. So the LSAC website is super helpful. In addition, because it has a lot of information about how the whole process works in terms of the application, and also has some school profiles, things like average LSAT scores, average GPAs, what their admit rate is, all kinds of good information. So when you're doing school research, now some of you may have some thoughts on schools you might want to look at. Maybe you have a region within the US that you're interested in being, whatever it is, and there's more information you can get on that. But also, if you're just not sure, the LSAC website is really good in terms of giving you a sense of what's out there. Now, when you're looking at let's say I have some schools in mind. Okay, what am I looking for? So some things to look for: specific programs. So what I mean by that is schools often have different clinics, different law journals, basically things that you can get involved in. So particularly if you have an interest in a specific area of law, or you want to get some hands-on experience in a particular area, looking at the different programs, clinics, and law journals is really important. And looking to see what are the structures of the law school classes. So for example, Northeastern has a pretty well-known co-op program where you can actually, you're actually out of the classroom a lot more than most programs. Likewise, you can see on a profile that Harvard has one of the largest law school classes. So if that's not something that's for you, then Harvard's probably not the greatest choice. So a lot of different things in terms of the characteristics of the actual law school. Costs, obviously a huge piece. One thing I wanted to talk about here is that it's really important to know that you should not be totally daunted by seeing the costs. There is so much opportunity out there for financial aid and merit awards that I just don't want you to be scared away by a really high sticker shock. So please know that there's a lot of help out there, and the earlier you apply in a cycle, the more opportunity you have to take advantage of that money. So obviously it's a different situation for everybody, and I'm happy to talk one-on-one with you about yours. But in general, I want you to just not be deterred by that if law school is something you want to do. Scores and admissions. So what I want to talk about here, scores in terms of average GPA and LSAT scores. But again, kind of like with the cost, don't be deterred too much. I've seen some surprising numbers get into really, really top schools just because they're really compelling candidates otherwise, and they've made quite an impressive application to that school. So don't be completely deterred if you see something that feels out of your reach. Definitely talk to me about it, and we'll see what we can come up with. And in terms of admissions, what I mean there is keeping track of dates and deadlines. You will find that generally most applications are in late August, early September that they open, and most close somewhere between the end of February and the end of April. So generally, you always want to be applying in the early part of that, and we'll talk a little bit about that in terms of the LSAT in a minute. And finally, outcomes. You want to kind of know, okay, where are these people who graduate from these law schools going? Are they employed? Are they in corporate firms? Are they in public service places? What are they doing? So I want to show you this profile. So this is from a website called Law School Transparency, and if you just Google that, it's the first thing that comes up or the second thing that comes up. They have these school profiles that are really helpful. So what you want to pay attention to here is, for example, if you went to Columbia, you can see on here that this large firm, means that 79.6% of the 2017 graduates went to a large law firm, and then you'll see small and federal clerkship and public service. So for example, if you were really passionate about going into public service, Columbia isn't necessarily your top choice. Whereas you'll see other, like NYU, for example, has a lot higher number for public service usually. So you can also see the top states. So if you have a region or state that you have in mind that you'd like to be, you think, in terms of settling down, or at least just after law school, you can check that out as well. And there's a lot of good information here in terms of who's passing the bar, who's, what's the employment, all of that kind of stuff. So that can be really, really helpful if you take a look at those profiles. Okay. So I mentioned a bit about this already in terms of it's always really good to apply during the beginning of the cycle. So around September is really great. It's not impossible by any means to get in later than that, but most admissions processes are rolling, both for the money and the slots. So there's just less available the longer you wait. Taking the LSAT. So some of you may already know the LSAT scores are good for 5 years. So for those of you seniors or anyone who's thinking about taking a year or two off, I highly recommend, and this is on the advice of a lot of alumni I've talked to, that you take the LSAT somewhere around your senior year. So maybe this summer or just within the next year or so, even if you're not applying to school this coming fall, just because you're in a better sense of studying and test taking in terms of your mindset. Plus, if you're starting a full-time job at some point, it can be really hard to set aside that time. So that can be really helpful, particularly if you're pretty certain that you're going to be applying within the next 5 years. The other big thing to know with the LSAT in terms of scores and timing is that the schools, unlike when you applied to college, they actually see every time you take the test and what the score was. Therefore, you want to try not to take the test more than twice. Obviously, not everybody does well on their first try. Maybe they just, didn't sleep well, felt sick, whatever. So totally fine to take it a second time if you didn't get what you thought you would. However, if you take it a third time, doesn't look as good in terms of they ask, well, what didn't you learn about taking it the first time and the second time? So just keep that in mind. Not one you want to be taking multiple times. Not to mention they are pretty expensive. So definitely don't want to be wasting money on that. The other piece I'll say on that in terms of taking the LSAT is there are fee waivers for taking the LSAT. And I attended a workshop not too long ago, and they said that for some reason they usually deny those fee waivers initially. But for the most part, those who appealed the decisions did get the fee waivers. So seems like a lot of extra work to me, but just wanted to make sure that you know that it's usually worth applying for a fee waiver for taking the LSAT because it's typically over $200. So not small pennies. So definitely take advantage of that. Then in terms of recommendation letters, that's another big piece of the application. So in general with the application, you've got your LSAT score, your transcript with your GPA, a personal statement, and sometimes some supplemental materials, and your recommendation letters. So anywhere from 2 to 4 typically are required for law school, and you usually want the majority of those coming from an academic reference. I would say the closer you are to having graduated from undergrad, the more professors you would have writing for you, whereas you probably want to have a current supervisor or someone who knows you outside of school the further you are out of school. Um, Sometimes schools will give you a little bit more direction on that, saying they specifically want a professor and they specifically want a supervisor or whatever it is. But definitely take a look at that, and you can be thinking about already, even if you're a senior right now and graduating in a little bit here, you can think about talking to your professors early to ask them if they would be willing to write a letter. Sometimes professors would prefer to actually write a letter right now, even if they just keep it in their file, because they know you right now. And if you ask them 2 years from now, you're just not going to be as present in their memory. So the letter might not be as compelling. So definitely consider talking to your professors early, no matter when you're going to apply. So that's kind of one of the steps you can take early. Another one in reference to the LSAT is thinking about what is your timeline and when's the best time to study. So if you have some downtime this summer, or if, I know people are really all over the place in terms of how stressful their semesters this semester are. If you have some extra time, maybe that's a good opportunity to do it. But the other piece is, no matter when you decide to study, it's always good to take a practice test first to get kind of a baseline of where you are. And obviously practice tests are not exactly on the money in terms of predicting what your score will be, but it'll give you a general sense of the range of where your test score might be for real. So those are free. You can, or at least there are several that you can take that are free, usually one through the LSAC website, and other opportunities like through Kaplan and some of the other test taking companies, you can get a free practice test. So think about that for sure. And then I'm just going to go over the questions for a second here. Okay, do you expect the 2021 and 2022 entering classes to be abnormally competitive due to COVID? Good question. So I would say slightly more competitive. I would say it's still the case that people are spread out in terms of, I would say grad school overall, meaning all grad schools, all law schools, med schools, business schools, all of those are going to uptick a bit. The reality, though, is that we're still actually recovering in terms of number of applications from the 08-09 recession. So it's still actually a decent time to apply to law school numbers wise. So even if we do have an uptick, it's still not going to be where it was 10 years ago. Or if it's close, I don't see it being overly competitive. So short answer is a little more competitive than normal, but I don't see a huge spike. And along the same lines, do you anticipate the satisfactory, unsatisfactory policy changes to make an impact on applications? I'm actually going to answer that in just a minute. So, all right. So campus opportunities, obviously these have changed a little bit with our situation right now, but I did want to mention a number of things. So whenever we're back, and also this applies, we will have some virtual opportunities that apply to this as well. So for example, attending campus events related to legal issues or with presenters from the legal profession. So I know a number of you came to the Bernstein Sharp panel back in the beginning of March now. Yep. And that was great. Those types of things are really helpful to go to. If things work out, we'll also have the graduate school fair again in October. There are at least about a dozen or so law schools that do come to that. So even if they're not your perfect top of the list schools, you might want to use that as kind of practice for talking to law school admissions reps. Attending a law school open house or getting a tour. So obviously, again, as soon as things start to open back up, and I'll address this a little bit in terms of virtual opportunities, but anytime that you can just get involved and kind of get on the mailing list and that sort of thing with any law schools that you are interested in, that's always a good thing. Talking with lawyers about their experiences, this is obviously something that we can help you connect with, particularly alumni. So definitely keep that in mind. Those things can generally happen by phone or virtually anyway. So our situation now is not going to impact that in a bad way. Part-time internships, hoping that there will be more of these in terms of remote, but always keeping an eye out for opportunities even during the school year, so even next fall. If there are opportunities locally, I know some of you have been familiar with the GEM Plan program that we've had in the last couple of years, where there's some local alums who have been very generous in helping place multiple students in law-related internships. So keep an eye out for more information about that. And finally, Maine Law Day is a great opportunity. I'm hoping that we'll be all set and back in September so that this will move forward. I expect it'll be moved to the spring, if not. This is an opportunity for you to go down to Portland to Maine Law and learn about what it's like for law students, particularly in their first year of law school. While it is at Maine Law, it's not about just going to Maine Law, it's about law school in general. We have panels by law school admissions officers, current students, and you actually have a mock law class. So I know a couple of you have actually been to that, and it's a great opportunity to kind of just dive in and see what it's like for half a day. Okay, so now we've got some of the new information. So LSAT updates. So for anyone who's been actively looking at taking the LSAT, you may have seen that the March and April tests were canceled. The latest news is that there is a new test called LSAT Flex, which they're going to be rolling out. They said there'll be an announcement, I think, by tomorrow, but it's going to be at the end of May, and it'll be some sort of at-home, not in-person option for those who want to take the test that way. And then they're hoping that things will improve in terms of being in person after that, but I expect there might be another one that's in person. For any of you who may have already taken a test, they're really opening things up in terms of they're allowing certain students, depending on when you took a test, if you canceled a score, you are allowed to restore that, look at the score and restore it if you want to. So that's really not something that's ever been done. So feel free to chat with me about that if you think that might be you. So there's going to be a lot of changes with those LSAT scores, but definitely keep an eye out on the LSAT website, and obviously feel free to check in with me if you have questions there. Law school admissions in general are moving forward, kind of quote unquote business as usual. We're hearing from law schools that they want people to really keep an eye out on their websites and particularly on social media to see if there are any changes in terms of whether application deadlines change or are extended or changed in any way. So definitely keep up to date with that, particularly if you're looking at specific schools. But in general, the admissions processes are moving along, and I've heard from several seniors and an alum who have already received offers, and so those offers, if you are waiting for one, are still coming out. Okay, and then the pass-fail grading option and your transcript. So to the question that was asked earlier as well. So this is a big thing, as you know. A lot of schools, including Colby, are either giving the option for students to choose pass-fail for their courses, or some schools have actually mandated. Law schools are not going to be penalizing you if you choose a pass-fail option. So if you feel you need to do that or just want to do that, that is perfectly fine. That is not going to impact your chances of getting into law school. It is also the case that the LSAC organization is going to be making sure that there is a specific letter for anyone who is applying in the future who was in school during this particular semester and therefore might have some irregularities in terms of maybe it becomes harder for you in terms of you might have not as high a GPA for this semester with everything going on, but particularly for the pass-fail grade options. So please know that you should make the decision that's best for you in terms of pass-fail. and that's not going to decrease your chances of getting into law school. I should also mention that there are actually law schools that are going to pass fail options as well. So you can see there that they really understand that that's something that has to be done at this point. And then finally, virtual tours and networking. So I mentioned it's always good to get a sense of the school in terms of going on a tour there or auditing a class, that type of thing. A lot of schools at this point are now offering virtual ways to do that. So if you are actively in the search for a law school, definitely take advantage of that. Always good to be on their mailing list. Get a, just getting on that in terms of a check mark. That's not going to get you in or penalize you if you're not on there, but it does look good. So definitely take advantage of that, and we can help you as well as sometimes the school itself in terms of connecting you to current students there or alumni of that school. So all good to keep in mind. All right. And then finally, these are just some resources, and I'll send a follow-up email with a direct link to the LSAC website and Law School Transparency, and then also the American Bar Association that has some great resources for students. And then obviously Handshake, keep an eye out for opportunities there. And then definitely take advantage of me. As you probably know, most of us are working from home at this point, but we're normal hours and available for appointments all the time. So please do take advantage of that. And then I know we're at time, and I just wanted to ask if anybody has any further questions. And obviously if it's not something you want to ask in the big group, I'm happy to chat with you offline. So please feel free to take advantage of that. Any final questions? Okay. And I was just taking a picture of our participants list so I can make sure I email everybody. All right. Well, that's all I have for today. Thank you guys so much for jumping on the webinar. I hope this has given you some useful updates. Please feel free to follow up with me at any time. And I hope you're all doing well out there. And if there's anything we can do to help, please feel free to let us know. Have a great rest of your day.